Hi, my name is Dennis Machado, and this is my Business 501 IPP presentation on gentrification. First off, I just wanted to go ahead and define gentrification. And Merriam Webster actually describes gentrification as the process of renovation of deteriorated urban neighborhoods by the means of the influx of middle class or affluent people into deteriorating areas that often displaces poorer residents. Next, I want to look at who coined the term gentrification. It was actually a urban sociologist in London named Ruth Glass, and in 1964 she published her book Aspects of Change, and in her text is where she coined the term gentrification. In this text, Glass observed the extensive demographic shift of affluent persons moving back into urban areas, often leaving the prior and poorer residents displaced. In this book, Glass sought the input of historians, sociologists, geographers, and other colleagues to create a profile of London and map out the societal and demographic changes. Glass's impact on the topic was profound as a sociologist had created the term for the newly found issue. As you notice, gentrification has been taking place for numerous decades, but has been in the spotlight as of late. Next, I want to look at where does gentrification takes place. Deteriorated urban neighborhoods are often the target of gentrification. And what describes urban? Urban can be defined as the metropolis of the city with a high population density and with a high degree of built infrastructure. When you compare that to a suburban area with lower population density and lower degree of built infrastructure, that is actually where quote unquote gentrifiers actually migrate from. And according to McDonald's study, the studied neighborhoods of urban areas actually had a higher crime rate before gentrification actually took place. How does gentrification happen? Well, as seen in the early 1940s through the 60s, white flight saw the Caucasian population migrate towards the suburban areas and opted for that style of living, which left the minorities to inhabit the urban dwellings. As this happened, lower property values depreciated from the land, bringing rent prices down that attracted a lower socioeconomic renter. The area of the urban areas often become worn down and hard to renovate due to the low socioeconomic stature of the current residents. Next, the affluent persons are attracted back into the city, whether it be for the proximity to work or easiness of travel of living in the city, and they actually purchase the land or housing units and choose to renovate them, causing the land and rent to rise in value, along with the cost of living that the prior residents can no longer afford. And it's gentrification because it's an increased economic investment opportunity for the gentrifier. They come to the land looking to make an economic profit from living there. Next, we have the ethical critique of gentrification. Why is there an issue with gentrification? Gentrification can be seen as a microcosm of the American racial and societal model in its entirety. As discussed before, white flight left minorities to inhabit the urban neighborhoods, establishing a cultural unity. Due to the opportunity of profit from the cheaper rent, the residents that comprise the culture of the neighborhood are left displaced by the gentrifiers because they're no longer able to sustain that cost of living. It is extremely unfair for the poor original residents who had created the atmosphere of the neighborhood to be left displaced. Next, we look, are there any positives to gentrification? And when we look into this topic, we have to nullify any negative connotations that gentrification holds. Studies have actually shown a decrease in crime rates once the neighborhood has seen the process of gentrification. And once the renovations are complete, the housing units as well as the surrounding infrastructure began to rise in value again. And this is solely due to the new renovations of the units financed by the quote unquote gentrifiers who brought their money into the area. Researchers argue that the process of gentrification actually has a positive impact on the cultural divide because of the different ethnicities moving back into the urban areas, mixing with the prior residents helps build that bridge over the racial divide. As previously mentioned, the surrounding areas are brought back to life due to the new renovations, not only necessarily the housing units, but the other infrastructure such as sole proprietorships, small restaurants, or individual businesses are now being patronized back by the residents who have just moved in because they do have that extra disposable income that the prior residents do not, and that sparks an economic change within the area's environment. And maybe the issue of displacement is being overstated. A study between New York City residents found that only 6 to 10% of the moves in New York City were attributed to cost of rent being too high or displacement due to private action, meaning that private contractors came in to build condominiums in urban areas. Next, we have the argument of gentrification is just a natural process. Critics who oppose gentrification as a negative state it is a natural shift of supply, meaning it's an economic issue not necessarily attributable to race or societal qualms within the United States. Large cities such as San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York City, and Portland, where gentrification is at an all-time high, is because of the short supply of urban housing units, along with the high demand for the close proximity to work, such as high-end companies such as Google, who maintain a high number of well-paid employees. The housing and urban development considers living to be unaffordable when it comprises costs exceeding up to 30% of the resident's income. With a city such as Los Angeles, residents pay up to 35% of income in rent, which is considered unaffordable, and that is also the case in other main cities, as I had just mentioned. A study from 2013 shows that more than half of the residents in the US pay more than 30% of their income to rent. And from 2000 to 2014, income only increased by 25%, while rent increased by more than 50. So what we have is an issue of affordable rent in America and not necessarily an issue of gentrification everywhere taking place at once. And in closing, it's imperative to realize that the ethical implications that gentrification poses on the American society. Displacement of prior minorities and loss of cultural real estate should not be ignored. Again, the issue of gentrification is the opportunity for affluent persons to economically profit off a lower socioeconomic neighborhood, and that's what a lot of legislation is fighting, and that is where the ethical debate kicks in. With that being said, it should be acknowledged that there are outside forces that affect where people live and how the supply and demand of a city and of the housing units dictate the price of rent in an area, like the cities mentioned of Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York City. And I want to thank you for listening to my presentation. Thank you so much.